Hey guys, welcome back to Tribe Talk. It's Jim here with Mike. Say hi, Mike.
Hi guys, how's it going?
We got a very special guest today, and you know him better than I do, Mike. So why don't you introduce Byron?
Yeah, so Byron, I've known Byron for it's probably been close to 13, actually more than that, 14 or 15 years. And Byron and I have known each other for a long time. We've grown up, I think, in a lot of different ways throughout our career and so forth. And man, I've come to a point where I just really love you and respect you. So I'm looking forward to this today. So anything to say to get us started?
No, I appreciate you guys having me, and as well, I completely love you. Yeah. And I would agree. We definitely grew up together.
Yeah, we did, which he had to point out to me here recently. I'm like, no, I've always been an adult.
There is no chance that that's true. Absolutely none. But I appreciate our guest being nice to you.
Yeah, that's right. So, man, just to kind of get started, Byron, you work with me out at 7 Special Forces Group. You've been a Special Forces guy for how many years?
This December will be just over 21.
Yeah, so 21 years. Got a Green Beret sitting with us today, and I'm looking really forward to this conversation about just how, we're talking about you, we're talking about life, we're talking about your family, and we're talking about how God's been involved in all of that. So this is really going to be a fun day for me. So just to kind of get us started, just give us a little background. Where'd you grow up, and kind of give us an idea of how you grew up.
Okay. So I was born in Kettering, Ohio. Grew up in Dayton originally, which was a little bit on the negative side as far as society goes, right? Very low income. The demographics were completely opposite as far as like the racial profiling and that kind of stuff. And there was definitely a lot of hatred in the area. So my mom decided we needed to move over to Brookville, which is about 30 minutes away. Grew up on 2-acre land, and went to a school that essentially had like 900 between elementary all the way up to high school. But the main reason for kind of moving was my dad was an alcoholic. I didn't necessarily see the abuse as much as a kid. Not until we did kind of move away, and that's where I started seeing like, okay, this is why she moved us, because there was abuse, whether it was physical, emotional, verbal. And then shortly thereafter, she was struggling as a single mom. Ended up getting assistance from her parents, and then we moved to Florida, Clearwater, in between like the Tampa St. Pete area. Mm-hmm. Once we got there, I think there was a lot of resentment. So I ended up essentially kind of turning on her, but that's where I really spent the rest of my time until I joined the military.
Okay, and so I'm sorry I missed it. What were you talking about with your dad? Do you want to go into that a little bit for us, or?
Yeah, no, it's so as I look back, I don't really know my father. I actually found out 4 years ago, that he ended up dying. I thought he was dead already. Mm. What I do know about him, because I don't really remember a lot of the childhood, I kind of like suppress those memories. But I went back when I was 15, so basically I ran away from the house, ended up taking a Greyhound bus up to Ohio. It was the winter time, and I just kind of like knocked on his door, right? That's where I really seen it kind of, the purpose of why she left, because when I got there, all we were doing was drinking, snorting coke. There was like knife fights in the house, because essentially he had what he called the home of lost lambs. You have a question?
Well, yeah. Are you talking about when you went back when you were 15, or before you left? This was going on.
Yeah, when I went back at 15, right?
Okay, gotcha.
That's where I was essentially doing it because I was rebelling against my mother, whether that was resentment or I just didn't have that father figure that was kind of there watching out for me. So I started doing drugs and drinking, and it was just like, hey, can't do this anymore. Went up there, and then essentially just kept that kind of rolling.
Yeah, it's crazy how the draw of a father is so important to a young man, even a bad one.
Mm-hmm.
Our young men tend to run to.
Interesting.
Did you kind of feel some of that?
Yeah, 100%. Especially like as I progressed and I actually started doing all the therapy and the things, when I really started realizing what was happening. At the time you don't know. You're just like, well, I'm not getting along with my mother, so I'm going to go back to my dad. That's where I want to be. I know he'll take me in, right? I'll get a chance to do whatever I want to do, and maybe there'll be some role model, or mentorship from a father figure, which I never did have. So, unfortunately, I went back, and it was the negative. Him and I ended up getting in a fight in the kitchen. I cracked his ribs, and then my mother was pretty much like, hey, what do I need to do to get you back here? So she ended up pulling me back, and then I just continued that negative pathway of doing drugs, dealing drugs.
Wow.
So this is the 15, 16, 17-year-old time frame where you're kind of growing up and trying to figure out where you're supposed to be in life and all those kinds of things. And already you're starting out with this sort of a beginning of, I guess, kind of having the feeling of life is extremely tough. I got to survive and not really having any sort of a direction on where you're headed.
Yeah, 100%. Like I think the toughest age, and I still see it today, especially with kids that don't have fathers or single homes or whatever their story may be, is when you transfer from that middle school to high school time frame. You start going through all the hormones and the changes. Like you're really just searching what life meaning is, and because I was essentially absent. There was an absence of parental guidance, right? And it wasn't by my mom's choice. She was just trying to work and go to school, and she was on the struggle bus. So when you don't have that, you find your own ways to do that. Mm-hmm. And then once I stopped playing football, like that was just a downhill for me, and got with the wrong crowd. And then once you get into drugs, it's hard to get out because that's who you think your friends are.
Well, and the crazy thing too is like every kid at that age is looking to assert some kind of dominion.
Yeah.
Right. They're they're trying to, they're going to rebel a little bit. The difference in your story so far and in a home that's not broken is some boys have a safety net. Mm-hmm. Right. So if they go too far, they've got that figure that's going to bat them back into play.
Yeah.
Right. But I think every kid goes through that, especially at that age.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, so I know we're going to get into this more. I feel like it's going to kind of come back around. The reason why I say that is because as we're moving through this and talking about it, I think it's important for us to remember, where you came from. There was a target on your back almost, and we talk about this quite a bit in Junto about all of us are called to change the culture around us, to change it to what God wants it to look like, because that's where life is actually found. And it's hard for me not to think about this, about you in particular. We all have that battle early on where the world and our enemy is trying to pull us in a different direction, and to keep us from actually doing what God called us to do. And so I think it's interesting that with you, that was happening at a very young age. It happens to all of us, but yours was really hard and really tough. And so I think we'll get back to that here in a minute. Yeah. Okay. So I know you got a family today, and I love your family. Just give us a little family, what your family's like today, just so everybody listening kind of understands what it is.
Okay. So luckily I was blessed. Obviously after I went through all that stuff and found my way into the military, that's when I met my wife, which is by far the most loyal person that I've ever met. If it wasn't for her, I definitely wouldn't be here today. So her name's Arlette. Go ahead.
That's what I was going to ask.
Okay.
You beat me to it. Good job.
Yeah. No. So, so Arlette, she's an amazing woman. Strong, just courageous, and has went through every battle with me along this journey. And then I've got 2 kids, Cody, which is 13, and then Avery, which is 11. Right now, I mean, everything's kind of on positive glide path, right? And I equate that to reigniting that fire and following God and reading the Bible and the prayers and keeping me on a straight and narrow and providing me that direction and purpose. as far as like the things that keep us grounded and all that, a lot of times is like we spoke about before, is just going to the RV parks, right? Being out in nature. Obviously the kids are active in every sport known out there, whether it's dance, football, cheer, lacrosse, choir, or like actually just sung for a choir just to prove to our kids like, hey, no matter how long it's been, like you can still do anything that you put your mind to. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, no, they're amazing.
That's awesome. Okay, so you got the family. We're going to dig into that here a little bit more. we got a little bit of understanding of your background, how you grew up, and I think that'll come back up again. So then you're going through life, and what made you decide, like, man, I'm gonna join the military, the Army, and just tell us that story real quick.
Okay. So essentially, kind of going back to like those teenage years, right, and trying to find my way and my path. Probably the first real male role model. My friend introduced me to a guy which I completely hated at the time. He drove me nuts, but he offered me a job. So
kind of like Jim does. Yeah, that's how.
Hey.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So with that, like we actually ended up like turning that around, right? And we became really good friends, and he was a male role model to me. The problem with that was he owned a lawn service, and a lot of the times, and it's unfortunate, right? Because like you talk about in the Junto tribe, we're supposed to be craftsmen and do God's work. However, there's a cost that normally comes with that, whether it's alcoholism, smoking weed, doing drugs, and that kind of stuff. So I loved him at the time because he provided all of those things for me. He provided the drugs. He would, we'd go show up to work and we'd smoke weed, go to our first lawns, right? Smoke the rest of it in the middle of the day, go back to his house, do some coke with his family around, like, obviously not a positive environment. And I was never really religious, right? My parents kind of like, we went to church, and, there's a lot of questions about religion around my house just due to the different, how do I want to say it? The different levels and what people actually believed. So there were a lot of questions, but I felt in my heart when I was going through all of that, that wasn't the place for me. I just, somewhere in my heart and in my gut, I just felt like this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, I'm better than this. So I kept trying to quit, and nothing was happening. Then 9/11 happened. And I think, again, for a lot of us, that was a turning point. Just realizing, like, the nature of the event and how large that was, how catastrophic. So that's like, okay, I need to join the military. So I went into a recruiter. I actually got denied the first time because of all my past history.
Yeah.
Being charged with like assault and battery, DUIs, a bunch of different traffic violations, you name it. And then my brother ended up joining the military. And I went to his graduation. I was like, nope, this is my calling. So after that, I went back into another recruiter, did all the waivers, and eventually got accepted into the Special Forces 18X-ray program.
Did you quit cold? Like, was it that revolutionary a moment for you?
Great question. It wasn't. It's easier to say, yeah, I just like, hey, that was my calling, right? So after I tried the first time to get in and I was denied, I was like, okay, well, maybe that's not it, right? So I became a personal trainer, got certified in that, started training at Valley Total Fitness, and then I was like, no, what can I do to do this? So I actually got a massage licensure certification. So I went to school for a year, simultaneously while working nights at a strip club as a bouncer. So it was a slow pull, right? Because even though I was starting to try to like get a job, go to school, find something that would work for me, I was still working in the strip club, right? Which obviously, what comes with the strip club? All the other same problems.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, the devil has this tendency to keep you from your purpose, doesn't he?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. So, yeah, it was definitely a slow burn. It was just that slow process of like starting to kind of transfer over. And throughout there, once I seen my brother's graduation, I was like, no, this is it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just sitting here thinking about how that calling that you felt you had, and then feeling as if maybe that's not the calling, and then still going back into it. Anyway, there's probably a whole lot of stuff we could actually talk about that, and that could turn into a whole nother podcast in itself.
Well, I mean, and you've heard this story before, Mike. This is brand new to me, so I'm on the edge of my seat right now.
Yeah.
It is interesting though that like the roadblocks that are put up in our way, and but once you know, and I'm looking forward to hear the rest of your story. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, so you go to SFAS, which we've kind of talked about here on the program before, but SFAS is the process that a person goes through to get selected to be a Green Beret. So you made it through that, which was probably really easy. That was a joke.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, way easier than buds for the SEALs.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Oh, boy.
Thank you for not bringing the Air Force into this.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So you was SF kind of something you were originally, because you talked about 9/11 and these different things. Was SF something you were really actually thinking about? SF being Special Forces, Green Beret. Were you thinking about that at any point, or what brought that on? I guess.
Honestly, I had no idea.
Interesting.
Right? So, at the time, all I know is I had heart and drive.
Yeah.
And I always put 100% into everything that I do.
That is true.
Which, pros and cons, right? So, con, obviously, with all the drug use. Because when you put everything into that, then obviously what you receive is the same, except for on the negative side. So, I just went in a recruiter and I was like, I want the hardest thing you got. I didn't even know SFO was a thing.
I can see him saying that, by the way.
And he's like, I don't know, this is really hard. And I was like, come on, it can't be that hard, right? So I ended up just training up for it. And I actually got out of shape when I went to basic training because of all the training that I did before.
I believe that.
Yeah. So, but no, I had no idea that GBs and the difference, right? All I've seen the movie Rambo and all the John Wayne movies that my dad used to watch. So.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So you made it through SFAS. You become a Green Beret. And if you feel comfortable with this, just tell us something interesting that our listeners might find from one of your deployments.
Okay. Before I get into the deployment thing, I do want to say, crazy part about SFAS. So I started through, right? So when you come straight off the street, they put you through a longer preparation course, because if you're regular Army beforehand, they know you already have some experience, right? So you just go straight to selection. Well, so as we're going through that preparatory course, I actually asked one of my instructors if I could fail, stay over the summer, go back through the course, because my brother was coming back. So it was actually my brother and I, we went through most of the course together. As 18 Deltas, which is the medical sergeant course.
Yeah, see, I didn't know that.
Who does that?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, he basically told me, like, hey, if you don't pass on the next one, like, we can't hold you over again. So, whatever. So that was a great time, especially going through the Delta course. There's some stories I'll tell you afterwards, but probably not good for this podcast. What the instructors asked my brother and I to kind of do to each other. One of those I can say, like, so the NPAs, right? Which is basically the little plastic tube, if you guys aren't tracking, that you put down your nose so you can actually breathe. Nasopharyngeal airway. So they make you do that stuff to each other so that way you know how your patient feels. Nasogastric
where
tubes.
this is going, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So you guys can think about the rest. But anyways, so that was amazing. We actually tried to get to the same group. We tried to both get to 7th group. That just didn't happen because they were standing up an additional battalion for each of the groups, so he got pulled to 5th group. But yeah, when I showed up to 7th group, I mean, if I look back at all the deployments, to keep this on a positive note, as I know we're going to get into the rest of the story, I'd say the best thing about all of my deployments was the very first trip in 2007. Because when we showed up, we had no idea what we were doing. It was my first deployment. I was trying to prove to myself, like, yes, I can do this, right? Because you always have those doubts in the back of your head. I don't how am I going to react if XYZ happens?
That's good.
So we ended up getting told by the commander at the time, like, hey, you're going to go out over to this place called Fob Robinson, right? And I'll leave out all the details because we don't want to worry about operational security and stuff. But essentially, this place was in the middle of nowhere. It was on top of a hill, and there was absolutely nothing. So, like, the other teams that were there, they only had a couple of tents. We were put down at the bottom, just kind of sitting in this moon dust. We didn't have a place to sleep. We ended up getting tents a couple days later. Like, that trip, we had to make everything from hand. Like, we had to figure out how to make our own showers, our own urinals. I mean, it was the best thing ever. Like, that is exactly what I thought BNSF was going to be, is living in a, like, completely obscure environment with nothing, and we had to figure it out.
Yeah.
So
That's cool. So, Delta.
yes.
What is a Delta?
So for me, you have two types of deltas. What it is on paper, and then what it really is. No.
Nice.
No, so the two types of deltas, right? You have so it's a medical sergeant, and some people are really good at medicine, right? And they understand, like, the clinical side, and they just love it, and those are the guys that typically go, like, physician's assistant or doctor afterwards. And then you have what I call myself, which is an 18 Bravo Delta. So the Bravos are the weapons sergeants, right? That just love to hit things and smash things.
And then fix it afterwards.
and then you can fix it afterwards. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the fixers, the Delta, the breakers, the Bravo. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
So I always like to screw things up before I fix it. So
It keeps you in a job.
it does.
Yeah.
We're talking human capital here, though, right?
Yeah.
Yes. But I mean, it's one of those things, like, with combat comes certain things. So
Well, I'm just picturing, like, the training environment, and you're like, hey, bad news, sir. I broke so-and-so. The good news is I fixed him.
That's right.
well, that's accurate. That's why I got into fighting and combatives afterwards.
Oh,
So,
nice.
yeah. So that was always my thing, right? Is I will most likely break things, but at least I was trained to fix it, at least when it comes to trauma. So you have the clinical Delta, and then you have the trauma medic. But the training, most people don't know, like, that you go through. It's very extensive within a year, right? I mean, you have the opportunities. I got a chance to go, again, with my brother to Tampa General Hospital, work in the ER, work on the fire department, right? So we do rotations there. We went out to Tahlequah, to an Indian reservation to work out there. So the sky's the limit. I mean, they ultimately teach you how to go out in the middle of nowhere, austere environment, and maintain a makeshift clinic. So
Okay. So I do want to say something really quickly is I, throughout the years, I've been with the military now for 15 years, which is crazy. And during that time frame, I've asked multiple people from different walks of life in the military that if they're wounded on the battlefield, who do they hope shows up to give them the help? And it almost always, doesn't matter what the service is, they tell me, I want an 18 Delta showing up. 18 being a series of soldier, which is Green Beret. I want an 18 Delta showing up because in my mind, you guys are emergency room doctors on the battlefield when all H is blowing up around you and you've got bullets flying and everything like that. And your job is to get these people stable and get them help as quick as you can.
yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate, and probably a way better way of explaining it than I just did.
I've just been around you guys a long time.
Well,
So.
the aggressive nature, too. It's fast. It's hard hitting. It's not precise. You're trying to stabilize them to get them to a higher level of care. Is that true?
Yes. So obviously, like, you have different phases of care. So that initial contact is like, hey, we need to get this person stabilized so we can get them back to at least a level of security to where, hey, now we can actually work on the guy, and then you're going to try to take them back and then get them evacuated to higher health care. Hopefully not having to sit on them too long. But again, we are trained in extended field care, prolonged field care, so you can actually maintain stability if you need to for 72 plus hours.
And being able to perform in that chaos, it takes a special person. So I just want to paint that picture for our listeners. It's totally different than what you would even see in an ER, which is a very controlled environment, sterile. You know, we're talking dust, dirt, gnarly stuff, and these guys have to keep their heads cool while they stabilize people. It's awesome.
Keeping your head cool while you're stabilizing people, and then relying on the rest of the guys in your team to protect you and the individual that's been down. And it's, I mean, we could go on for a long time. So it's a very cool position that you would have on an ODA.
Yeah, and by the way, sometimes working on your brothers.
Yes,
which takes an emotional toll too. So we'll gloss over that and move on to the next question.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's
which I think
honorable, Byron.
Yeah, which I think looking at Byron's face right now is hit home a little bit.
It does. Like actually hearing you guys talk about, because let's be real, you've been around the game long enough. Like as Green Berets, we're the quiet professionals.
Yeah, for
so
sure.
None of us like to actually talk about ourselves and what we do.
Yep, it's absolutely true. I'm not going to say it. With the other group of people I worked with in the past who enjoy talking about themselves all the time.
Don't do it.
Yeah, I'm not going to. Okay.
They need Jesus too.
Yeah, that's right.
Hey, but just side note, did you do any deployments in like the 2009, 2010 timeframe to Afghanistan?
Yes, my first deployment so I showed up to group December 2006, 2007, 2009, 2015 were my combat deployments. And then I have 4 other deployments down to South America and Central America.
There's a good chance that you and I ran into each other.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll have to talk about that offline.
We will.
Awesome. Okay, so a little bit ago, you know, I think you've somewhat figured out for your character. You're a hard charging guy. You're an intelligent individual, but you're pushing yourself quite a bit in different things.
And why does he hang out with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question.
I break things, and he's supposed to fix them.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good point too. See,
you guys have answers for everything.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We made that up ahead of time
in case you asked
you. Yeah, in case you asked us that question. Okay, yeah. So one of the things I want to ask you now is I guess the first time I met you, I was starting a job out there, and then you were doing a lot of combatives training in the same area, in the same facility, and so that's kind of how our relationship started getting started. So could you tell us a little bit about combatives, and then kind of we talked a little bit about an addictive personality, and kind of go into that combatives piece, and just let you take it from here.
Yeah, so I think the addictive personality thing is huge for this portion. You know, I talked about it before in a lot of the testimonies that I've shared with you specifically. The addiction when I was younger to football, trying to fit in there because I still, again, at that time didn't have my dad. And then once I kind of got over football, that's where I started to transition, trying to figure out other things, got the drugs. Then I got addicted to working out, right, and the personal training and that kind of stuff. The next addiction would have been like just training and trying to be the best Green Beret I could be. So at that time that we met, I'd already been through several combat deployments, deployment down to Dominican Republic. And when I showed up, when 7th Group did a BRAC move, right, the base realignment and closure from Fort Bragg and moved to Eglin, that's when I kind of got asked, like, hey, would you start up the first initial combative program for group? So that would just gave me something to focus on. So the intent of me actually taking that position was so I wouldn't deploy anymore, and I could actually like start a family with my wife, thinking like I would have time to actually help her. So if you're going to be the combative instructor, from the mind of an addict, is you got to be the best at that, right? In my own head, I can't train other people to do it if I'm not going to be the best.
Yeah.
So what that turned into is I would train people all day long. I would train with them. I would do my workouts in the morning. I'd work out with them all day long. I'd work out at lunch, and then I would go train at night for 3 hours at the gym.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Just really quick, not to interrupt you, but as someone that has a lot of experience in preparing athletes for a competition, that I can't tell you, that is mind blowing that you kept that sort of routine up for a really long time.
Yeah, just listening to that pace is exhausting.
No, yeah, I'm tired right now just thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm exhausted too, but that's why I had all the surgeries. So. But yeah, so the time that it was supposed to be us having, you know, our family and starting to begin that's where, you know, we had Cody during that time, and then she was pregnant with Avery. And it brought up a lot of real family struggles, because prior to that, I was never home, right? So there was always kind of like a honeymoon phase every time I had to deploy, come back, deploy, come back. So internally together, we thought we were happy, but then when you actually stay for 3 years, you're like, I don't even know who you are. And we were not accustomed to always being home, having to work the household together. So there was a lot of learning things. And then she resented me because I was actually not helping with the kids. And I was spending more time focused on my career and the addiction of combatives and the passion and the love for fighting as essentially that new addiction. Yeah. Right? But for the first 10 years of my career, after I felt my calling, again, I'm trying to do this in my own flesh, thinking I'm doing the right thing, following my calling. I was good for the most part. Yes, there was some ups and downs with alcoholism and, you know, like me putting my hand on Arlette at one, like, 4th of July party, and she told me never to touch her again. But for the most part, I was on a straight and narrow for 10 years, and that was because I always had something to focus on. I had combat, I had training, I had medical stuff, then I had combatives, right? There was always something that I was trying to put myself into, which kept me away from realizing that I wasn't actually good internally.
Gosh. Okay, so I think that's an important point. Is you're obviously, you're just, as we say in SF, you're a good dude. You just are. And when you say about someone that you're a good dude, it's not like, oh, he's a good guy. It means more than that. It means that you're a good human being. And so here we are, we're talking about how, you know, you had that addictive personality, and there was almost as if, is it possible that you're searching for something in all these things where you find something you're good at, and it just sucks you in, and then you're searching for something through in that process?
100%. I think it happens to all of us. We always try to search for happiness in something, right? So if I say, hey, my goal is I want to have my first fight. All right, cool. I get to my first fight. I should be happy.
Now what?
Yeah,
exactly.
Been there.
Now what? And then you put the next thing up there. And we're always chasing happiness through what we think is going to be called success because we put a mark on the wall. Now, not to say we shouldn't be motivated and try to strive for things, but the problem that I found, at least later in life and realized, was that I was searching through happiness through football, right? I wanted people to accept me. I wanted them to like me, right? I didn't want to be the fat kid and be picked on anymore. You know, it was like, okay, well, cool, drugs, awesome. That made me skinny, and all these people like me. They didn't like me. They liked the drugs that I was able to sell them, right?
Interesting, yeah.
And it just keeps going and going. So when you show up to SF, it's like, all right, well, they like me because I outwork everybody, right? I outperform everybody. So that was always the strive to be the best one, right? And I always try to be the best one. I always try to be first at everything. So I kept striving for that. And then once you hit that, you realize, well, that's not happy. So I was chasing the tail of something that wasn't achievable.
Yeah. So I want to say this really quickly because I think this is maybe one of the reasons why you and I get along so well is we kind of see, at some level, we see ourselves when we look at each other. Because, like, for example, years ago, I tell this story every once in a while. When we won our first national championship in hockey, Division I hockey, we'd just been on ESPN, you know, Aaron Andrews was there. It was just an amazing situation. And afterwards, everybody, I remember, I can still hear the music in the locker room of us just winning the whole thing. We're the best college hockey team in the country. And I was not in the room with everybody. I was out on the ice looking up into the stands, empty stands. Everybody was gone, and I felt completely lost and flat. And what I was missing was I was missing the beauty of actually the struggle and the suffering of the season, being engaged with my people.
Because it was over.
Yeah, and now it's over, and you think somehow that you're going to find some answer to this lost sort of identity or character of who I am. And then I didn't find it. And so I was actually, instead of celebrating, I mean, I was celebrating sort of, but it was also really, really painful all at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's crazy too is I think sometimes the military feels like we've got the market cornered on this because our calling is a higher calling. It's something above us.
Good point.
But this is a man problem. Like you think about all the people you know that are workaholics or pick a vice. So I just want to point that out for our listeners. This is not unique to SF or the military or
Nope.
those types of higher calling services.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I think so many men are struggling with that. Women too. But you know, and that's really where I got the passion for guys, is because I'm one, and I started noticing all the holes and the issues that I was struggling with. Okay, so thanks for that. So let me ask you this next. Now we're kind of getting into some pretty serious stuff here. All of it's serious, but I believe we kind of talked about this. Jim and I did this morning as we're preparing to talk to you. That God can even use really, really bad things in the world in order to get a hold of somebody, if that makes sense. And it will here in a minute. So you and I, just bear with us for a minute, guys, when we tell this story. But if you don't mind, tell me about the night, or tell us about the night that God used a strip club to save your life.
Yeah, so honestly, there were a lot of other events that led up to that one in particular, right? So after around the 10-year mark, and I got done with the combatives piece, one of the major turning points of my life was that I was 36 and I was told that I needed both my hips replaced. And I think that's where God ultimately was using all of those things.
Which is interesting because you need those hips for everything that you do and everything that you've been trying to find value and for yourself in. So anyway.
100%. So it literally took the wind out of my sails and was like, oh crap, now what am I? Who am I? Because my hips and my physicality was everything that I pushed my life for, whether it was for the military, for combat, for fighting, right? So after the 2015 rotation, so once I finished teaching combatives, I went back to a team, deployed again, and that was the trip that really highlighted that during some combat operations that we had. Hearing that, I was literally lost. So I couldn't do the physical things that I could. I didn't have that outlet, and that's when the outlet went back to what I previously had known. And because you can't do drugs in the military, but you can drink alcohol, right? That really became my vice. So it'd be drinking in the office, staying later, right? I would still workaholic, still staying later than everybody. I just happened to be drinking while I was there. I'd hit the shopette before driving down the road, crush a couple of cans, throw them out the door. So that way when I went home, my wife didn't know exactly how much I drank, right? So a lot of other incidences, but essentially those things led up to us getting in an argument. Arlette took the kids over to her family's house, which is right down the street. And I just had it, right? And the suicidal ideologies were kind of building up before that, but this was kind of my breaking point where I was actually going to do it. So I grabbed my gun out of my bedroom and I was like, I'm going to go kill myself. I didn't want to do it in the house because I didn't want the kids to actually see right? And have that trauma on their mind for the rest of their lives. So I went to the gas station, got some more to drink, started just driving around the area, completely obliterated. Don't even know how I made it to the strip club. So I sat out back and was contemplating, right? I just kind of seen it, went there, had the gun up to my chin. I was like, you know what? If I'm going to do this, I'm going to go out with a bang. So I'm going to party it up. So I went inside, hung out in the strip club, got the lap dances, the whole nine, dropped $1,700. And when I went back outside and I sat in my truck, I said one prayer.
Gosh.
And I was like, God, if you can get me through this and let me keep my family, I will never drink again. So after that, I think that strip club, and this is why I said this in my testimony, it was a blessing in disguise, right? He used all that negativity, but it was enough to get my mind out of that dark hole of committing suicide that I was able to go back home, suffer the pain of not having family there, and made me realize like they were my life. So from that day, I just continued with the struggle bus, right? Seeing the therapist, the chaplain, going to church, right? Like obviously we were in a small group together. Because I felt that day, that night is when I truly felt God's first initial presence.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, I love that. I think a lot of our listeners are going to be like, that's a terrible place, and they're going to judge you for that. But the reality of that story is there is not a battlefield that our God is not willing to chase us into.
Boom.
Isn't that cool?
Mm-hmm.
It's so important to wrap your head around that. It's God knows everything that's going on the planet, and he knew your heart, right? And so he showed up and said, "Hey, I'm here." And doesn't make life necessarily the easiest thing in the world afterwards, but it definitely opens up the door, and it just makes so many things easier to handle and go after. So super powerful. So yes, we were in a small group together, and I just think back to those days and what an awesome opportunity that was. I have to tell this story, and I want to tell it, and I'll do it quickly because we're running out of time. But there was a moment when we were in the sanctuary back at Cross Point, and where we went to church, and I was in the back row with my wife and some friends and whatnot, and you were like, I don't know, 2-3 people away from me. And Pastor Jeremy, I believe it was Jeremy that day, said, does anybody want to give their heart to Christ? And you raised your hand. Whew. And I felt it was almost like I disappeared and disappeared next to you. Like I was going to get to you. It didn't matter what happened because it was like this moment of like, man, I am going to support him. I don't know what this is going to be like. And at that point we had a decent relationship, but it wasn't, we also had some things in the past. And so next thing you know, I'm standing next to you and I got my arm on you. And it was almost like I was willing to whatever it was, to support you, fight for you, whatever it was. So tell us about that, what that day was like for you.
So kind of leading up to that, in the small group, I know every time I spoke up, there was a lot of tears, right? A lot of tears shed, a lot of like just guessing questions. So as we kind of casually speak about this now, like I would definitely like to point out to the listeners, like this wasn't just, oh, hey, we're going to talk about our problems like we
Absolutely.
are here, right? There was a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of tears, a lot of tears of that day. I think now's the first time I've ever spoke about that strip club day where I haven't cried, which I just cried yesterday, giving a plaque away to somebody because there's another incident, which we'll talk about later. But everything up to that point, it was almost like God's presence was putting the right people, the right speakers, the right language, right, in order to touch my heart.
It's good.
And I think between the small group, everybody leading up, and then I believe Casey Galligan was actually on there, and he was talking about his experience of being an atheist, right, and how he ended up finding God. And then like it all started building up where it was like, okay, well, I kind of believed but didn't believe, but then all these things had happened and led me to that spot. And when Jeremy asked like, hey, if anybody is feeling like there's anything that they need to get rid of and wants to, put their faith all in God, or if you need anything, I believe he asked us to stand up, and that's where we stood up and raised hands, and then obviously you put your hand on me. So like, very emotional. I think that was the clearing. That was the first day that I felt free, right? So
Wow.
we talk about in the military, and obviously in the Junto tribe about de oppresso liber and free and oppress. That's what God did for me that day.
So good.
It was the first day that I actually had a lot of that pressure off of my shoulders, and I was able to give myself forgiveness, which is probably the hardest thing to do, right? Knowing
Wow.
that God gave forgiveness for me, which then ultimately led to me getting baptized and, sacrificing myself and giving my full self to God.
So two things just popped into my head. One, our church doesn't do an altar call every day.
No.
So isn't it cool how God will orchestrate that emotion in you and then also orchestrate the desire in the head pastor to offer an altar call?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that's a coincidence. That's
Yeah.
really cool. And then the other thing that popped in my head was when Mike levitated up there. And
That's not really what I did. It's just,
yeah, of course. Yeah. But I mean, it felt a little out of body. You don't really
Yeah.
know how you got up there. Kind of
Yeah.
like driving home and you're there and don't remember how you got there
Yeah.
after a long day. But Mike getting up there, I just picture him putting his hand on your shoulder and then you instinctually throwing an arm bar on that dude. That would
Yeah.
have been pretty awesome.
What I was worried about is if I put my hand on his shoulder too fast, I could be in the clinch with him at any second here.
Yeah.
So I had to be careful.
When I tell this story in 10 years, that's going to go into it.
That's perfect.
we'll make a movie about it and change it,
Yeah.
and he'll take me down.
Sorry to provide levity to it.
No, it's
Such a
good.
serious discussion, but
No, it's good.
pretty awesome.
So, okay. Anything else on that, or you feel pretty good?
Yeah, pretty
Okay,
good.
okay.
I think it was essentially the turning point for me to continue my journey of struggles and triumphs
Yeah.
and tribulations and everything else that we're about to get into.
Okay. So, man, the last few years for you has been pretty tough as far as surgeries and all the different things that you've had to get. And there's been a lot, and they're not like small surgeries. They're pretty serious surgeries you've had to take care of. Back, hips, all kinds of stuff. My question for you is how have these affected you mentally, spiritually, physically?
So physically, I think it's pretty easy. I think most people can kind of see that, right? So just to go into the surgeries a little bit. So 3 hip surgeries, 3 spine surgeries, both hips replaced, spinal fusion, L2 all the way down to S1. And that's not to mention everything else that has happened, right? It provides, obviously, physically you just hurt every day, right? And it starts that vicious cycle where when you have the physical pain, obviously it turns into the emotional pain where you just hurt and you become drained, and then you get depressed and you're just like, gosh, I wish this could go away, but I can't use narcs. Can't, right? From that day of the strip club, I quit drinking. So just a huge battle emotionally, psychologically, right? What am I going to do next, right? Because I still wanted to serve in the military. Going back to your point is we felt like that was our higher calling. We're doing something good for something bigger than us, right? And that was God's calling for me to do that and serve the nation and humanity and our community. So just battling with what my purpose was, where I needed to go next. And throughout that, I got to a point where I was like, okay, hey, I'm okay with it. I'm never going to be a cool guy anymore, right? So just kind of talking with my wife, it was like, hey, I think I'm up to a certain point where we're good. I think I could probably have a couple of drinks just to relax, like take a little bit of this edge that's kind of off. My meds, everything was good. Came off as Zoloft for the anxiety and depression. So it started off like, yep, I'm only doing this occasionally whenever there's certain special events and stuff. And then obviously that snowballed and went downhill pretty fast with a few episodes culminating one more time which now I'm done drinking for life. Which, for the listeners, if you don't know, there's actually a lot of really good non-alcoholic beers right now. So if you ever get a
Nice.
crave, not if it's going to trigger you going into something bad again, but just saying, like Heineken, non-alcoholic, obviously you guys weren't paid to say that. I'm not paid to say that.
We are looking for sponsors. I'm not sure though.
Good point.
Probably not a good sponsor, but...
That's good. So, man, this question is not something I keyed you up for.
I'm good with whatever.
Okay. So, I'll just say it. Last, we prayed for you at the last infill. You specifically, we didn't say your name, because I had, the day we're getting ready for infill, which is a thing that we're doing with our ministry, and the day, like the night before we're getting really started, or the same night we're getting started, I get a text message from your wife saying that we can't find you, right? And so you were coming off of a surgery, and so we prayed for you that night, that you would come home. I'll just leave it at that. So
For context, we being the ministry, and,
sorry, yeah,
and 50 to 100 other men.
Yeah, 50 to 100 other men just praying for you and so forth. And so those prayers were answered. It was a little rough, but we found you, and now you're back home again, and through that struggle. If you want to touch on that.
Yeah, so that was kind of the culminating event, right? Of like going through. I tried to drink, and again, other episodes, RV park, anger, right? I would drive. I would just leave, because apparently that's my MO. Is just when a problem's there, I just take off instead of face it, especially while under the influence. So that night, honestly, I was so far gone. I don't even remember what it was, but there, again, goes back to family argument, the stress, whatever.
Medications.
Yeah.
For your back surgeries and stuff.
Yeah, the medication was huge, and I think going through all the so I've literally been going through surgery recovery for 10 years now. So every time you have a surgery, they put you on Percocet. And then every time you get a surgery, the next time you get on Percocet, it's not the same. Plus, you're talking about a prior drug addict, right? So this stuff just doesn't work the same. So typically what happens is I start taking the meds, and then I start taking more of the meds that I don't need. And then I would start drinking on it as well, right? So that day it was just a combination, too much Percocet, along with all the alcohol that I was drinking. And then once that argument was over, I was like, okay, I'm leaving, right? Because I didn't want to... I will say the positive note on this one, I at least wasn't having suicidal thoughts, which most of the times that's usually where my head would go, right? This would just be easier if I wasn't here, because really, what's my purpose of living, right? I lost all that. I lost it through the military. I lost it. I can't do any of the thing that I love anymore. The only thing that gives me fast adrenaline is riding my motorcycle, and a lot of times that's just not enough, right? So at least I didn't have that. However, I went to Publix, fell asleep in my truck. I was just going to let it all smooth over. She asked for Phil, which is my father-in-law, to go look for me. And when he did, I ended up running. So I ran into the woods, and I waited. They ended up coming, taking my truck, moving it, and then once they did that, I ended up going to Walmart, buying everything I needed to survive outside. Walked around Niceville quite a long time. Found a good spot in the woods and was pretty much homeless for the night. And my plan at that time was to, like, screw it. Life's just easier out there by yourself. You know, you don't have to... I wouldn't have to deal with the day-to-day grind, the struggles that I kept dealing with. I could literally just go there and just be.
You know, it's interesting. I'm sitting here listening. I'm thinking about you and knowing you for as long as I have. God has made you a certain way. You've got all these amazing blessings and who you are, your family, all the things that are there, and it's almost like you almost run from those that love you and care about you, and at times, I'm not saying you always do, but at times, and just I've been the same way. There's time, I remember living in this house. One night we got into about something, and I just got in the truck and just started driving. I drove for hours, and so anyway, it's interesting that the people that rely on us and God put them in our lives. And one of my buddies, named Randy, he said to me one time, he said, I'll never forget him saying this. He said, I have learned that my wife and my kids are on loan to me from God. and I remember listening to him say that, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's the most amazing thing I've ever heard. And the reality is they are on loan. We have responsibility. Anyway, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm a little disappointed in you, Mike, that you haven't brought up Elijah yet.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, he fought the prophets of Baal, and then he ran to the wilderness because he was.
It's a great point.
Depressed, and God lifted him up out of the muck and the dirt and his misery, and escorted him out of the woods after giving him a nap and a snack. So I guess my question is, like, did you experience something like that, Byron? Did God talk to you in the woods, and was there a message that you got from him?
100%. And essentially, after I got the nap and a snack, and some clothes because it was cold, when I woke up in the morning, so I went black on comms, right? Nobody was gonna find me, unless I wanted them to. So I did some prayers in the morning, and I want to say it was about 10:30. I turned my phone on and I made contact with them. And essentially the message that I got from God is, I'm going to continue down this path of I'm good, I'm not good, I'm good, I'm not good, if I don't consistently follow him, stay persistent in my efforts, right? Yeah. Allowing him to guide me. So after I've met him at certain places in my life, right? And I think this goes for all of us. A lot of times you're like, oh, I feel God's presence. And then a lot of times you're like,
where is he?
Where is he? I have no idea. And that's where we start questioning. And that's when we start going back to our own flesh. Like, I don't feel like God's here. We don't know the purpose. Like, why is this happening to me? Well, we're not always supposed to know. But bad crap always happened when I turned away.
Mm-hmm.
But it would always get better when I try to keep a daily schedule, waking up and reading the Bible and focusing on the spiritual side, and then getting whatever exercise I could possibly do, right? Focusing on that physical side, and then trying to stay in tune with my emotions, right? So like this holistic approach, when I was doing it for my flesh, was not good enough. So the biggest thing that I've noticed that I missed out on was that spiritual and the soul side. So the message for me was clear. You will never drink again, right? It has never done anything good for anybody. I don't even know why that was ever developed. I mean, maybe there's people out there that can have a glass of wine and they're okay with it, but not this guy. And I feel like that's the truth for a lot of men. Because we will always look for a vice, and you bring it up in your book, whether it's the nicotine, it could be energy drinks, the hormone therapy stuff that we do, right? We're always looking for something else. And the bottom line is that night of sleeping by myself in the woods made me realize that's going to continue for me if I don't make a stand for it and follow him daily and do my best and put my faith in him, whether I feel his presence or not.
Wow. So I'm not a prophet, so I'm not saying I have a message from God, but could you guys imagine what this man would do if you would put the level of effort that you did into all those other things that you were chasing into your relationship with God?
Doing it in a healthy way.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. That's so good.
It would untap such potential in you. It'd be pretty cool.
That would be cool. All right, and so we're getting a little bit low on time, so we got about 6 more minutes, and there's a couple things I still want to. Your story is amazing, so I want to get as much in as we can. Here recently, you and I were having a conversation in the shed, the world famous shed, and I had made a comment that I struggle sometimes thinking I'm a good father, I'm a good husband, and so forth. And so I catch myself asking my family all the time, "How am I doing? How can I do it better?" And then what I didn't know is that had an impact on you. So I don't know if it's the same day or whatever, but you went and asked your son, "How can you be a better dad?" And how did he respond?
So I want to say first, he's like, "Dad, you do everything for us, but the only thing I would ever ask is for you to never drink again." Mm-hmm. Right? and for me, one, I was glad that you actually, like, I heard you say that, and I was like, man, that's a good idea. I should probably do that, right? Because we think as parents a lot of times we're doing the right things for our kids, and, we're trying to make them better than we are, and we're trying to generational wealth, whether that's money or just knowledge, right? Being a scholar, different things that we weren't taught. So I try to follow Bruce. I think it was Bruce Lee. Don't quote me on that. Maybe we'll go look it up after this. But there was a saying that was like, instead of just trying to give your kids everything that you never had, why don't you teach them the things that you were never taught, right? So wow. I try to stay by that. So when you said that, I was like, man, I need to go do that, right? Because it's a great idea. So every idea in my head is not mine. I just try to use it from smart people other than myself, and I go utilize it. And when he told me, he's like, just don't ever drink again.
Yeah.
I was like, okay. So for kids that are just innocent and they're just candid and transparent to tell you, for me, that was God's truth speaking through him.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
They also see and notice everything.
Yeah.
Like, we don't hide anything from them. It's
nope.
crazy.
Yeah.
That's really good.
So now I do non-alcoholic beer and, my caffeine, my other vice.
Yeah, that's I'm pretty sure God gave us coffee. I'm almost positive.
Oh, that's 100% true.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're okay there.
Well, this is kind of a rhetorical question, but how proud are you of your son that he had the guts to say that to you?
Super proud. So my kids always make me proud. Obviously, I try to teach them, like, if there's something that you feel in your heart, like, one, don't be afraid to say it. But if you are afraid to say it, then that probably means that I'm doing something wrong as a father as well, right? Because, like, we all know, there's been something that's been laying really heavy on my heart, and I'll leave names out, but there's certain individuals and, the cyberbullying and the teen bullying and these kids committing suicide. There was an event that happened kind of surrounding us, and it's horrible. So, like, knowing, at least if I can provide them an open arms and say, hey, you can tell us anything, at least I've done my part, knowing that I've already had to talk with them. You're probably not going to tell me if somebody's bullying you. We know that, right? Like, I never spoke up and told anybody I was having problems either. We try to hide that because we're afraid of humility, and honestly, like, that's the biggest thing that I've learned out of all of this, and that's why I share my story today. That's why I've shared all my testimonies, because the moment you can be humble with yourself, stop being afraid to tell people that you need help or that you're having issues, the better off you're going to be, because you're going to get outside sources, and as you speak to them, God's going to put certain people in your lives for specific reasons, and it's all to lead to him.
That's really good. Yeah.
I have nothing to add.
No, I don't either. I and that might be our last question for you, because you got to go pick up your son here. What are the last words of advice about God that you can give people listening? And maybe that was what it was. Whatever's on your heart, just whatever you can share that with us right now to close it out.
Yeah. So, I guess additional advice that I would give, right? There's always spiritual warfare around us. Just like anything else, right? Like we tend to look at social media, news, and we get so much clutter in our head. And I am going to bring up Dan Rayburn, amazing man. So he comes out and does a lot of speeching and stuff for all the different special forces groups. And I loved what he said. Like, one of his opening things was like, hey, as you start to do this transition, everybody's going to come speak to you. They're going to try to make money off you. Hey, I can help you get this job. He's like, tell them shut up.
Yeah.
He's like, tell me to shut up. And this guy is like the social media guru that knows everything. If you don't know him, go look up Dan Rayburn. But he literally told us to tell him to shut up, right? And he was there supposed to be teaching us about what to do next. And the point behind it is tune out the white noise, right? We get so focused on everything else around us that we lose focus of what we were truly developed for, which is why I love the fact of your main points in the Junto tribe. We were put here to be a servant of God, right? Which he himself came to earth as Jesus, the only true authentic man. So instead of me focusing on all this worldly things around me and what I think I should be doing next, why don't I just put some faith in the thing that we know is true? And that is the book that was written about Jesus.
The source document.
Boom chaka.
Yeah.
So good.
What's cool too is like he's basically saying, I could tell you how to be another, what's his name, Sam Rayburn?
Yeah.
Dan
Rayburn.
Dan.
But if you follow that track, you will deprive the world of a Byron Shelton.
Yeah, it's good. It's really good.
Yeah, it's cool.
Oh man, Byron, thank you. Thank you so much for your story. Thank you for being man enough to bring forth the struggle and the things that you've been through. And I know this is going to be a big podcast for a lot of people to get help. And I think it's great that you did this. Thank you for all you've done for us. Thank you what you've done for our country. Thank you for being my friend. And thank you for not beating me up in the gym that one day when we got into it. Just want to put that out there.
Maybe addition to, we can talk about that story.
Yeah, we'll tell that one some other time. But thank you, my friend. I love you, and I guess that's it for today.
Thanks for sharing. Love you guys.
Love
Keep
you
fighting
guys.
a good fight.
Keep
Peace
it
out.
up. See you.